Thank you very much, Jojo, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone from myself. So thanks very much for joining us today. As Jojo mentioned, we had a number of changes that were discussed by airlines last year in our various working groups and were adopted by airlines last year through our different governance processes. Some of those changes have taken effect already, and that's specifically the Revenue Accounting Manual, but the majority of these changes take effect from the 1st of June this year. So there are a few actions that are required from airlines to get ready for these changes, and it's really, really important that airlines are fully aware of this and ready to go for the 1st of June. So thank you very much for joining us today, but we'd also really encourage that you take the materials that we'll send out following this webinar and that you share these internally with all your other teams that are impacted by these changes. So the changes we're looking at support involuntary flight changes, but specifically irregular operations. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at some background as to what's changing and why, and then we're going to dive into some details of the three major changes. So some changes to Resolution 830D, which governs travel agency processes, some changes to Resolution 735D and 766, which govern airline processes, and then some changes to the Revenue Accounting Manual, which look at interline billing processes. What we're then going to do is we're going to look at a very simple flow chart on how these changes come together and what the end-to-end process looks like from the 1st of June. As Jojo mentioned, there is a facility within the webinar tool to answer questions. Unfortunately, you're not able to kind of speak on the webinar, and there's over 70 people on the call today, but you're most welcome just to type a question in. When we get to the end of the webinar, if we have some time, we'll do our very, very best to address those questions today. And if we're not able to address all the questions, we will ensure that they're incorporated in the FAQ document, and we'll send that document out to everyone that was on the webinar today. So either way, we will respond to all your questions. As Jojo mentioned, we do have the regional campaign also, so your airline will have been contacted via your accredited representative at the Standards Conference. So every one of our member airline has just one person that's designated as their accredited representative. That person has their CEO's endorsement to represent their airline in IATA standard setting activity. And the campaign that we have through our local teams will be contacting that person directly. So it's also a really good idea if you are not that person, find out who that person is in your airline and just make sure that you're looped in with them also. So I guess the first point with irregular operations is that obviously irregular operations create a lot of stress. They create stress for passengers, certainly, and that's our most important consideration in everything we do. But they also create a lot of stress for airlines, and that's stress for the frontline staff that are dealing with passengers in these situations at the airport or in contact centres. But then they also create a lot of stress in the back end for airline teams that are sorting things out. Teams that are supporting travel agents, teams that are supporting financial processes, interline billing, and relationships with interline partners. So it's really, really important to have very clear and effective processes in place before things go wrong so that everyone knows exactly what they're going to do in every circumstance. So a lot of the changes that we're discussing today will involve things that you need to ensure are captured within your internal processes, and you'll need to ensure that these are trained to your teams, your frontline teams and your back office teams. Supporting the industry processes around irregular operations, we have a number of standards, and these cover different aspects of irregular operations. So we have two types of standards. We have binding standards that airlines must follow, and then we have some standards that provide best practice or guidance. So these include some of the resolutions we will look at today. So we have Resolution 830D, which outlines the reservations process that an IATA accredited travel agent must follow when booking an airline's flight. And that resolution is binding on IATA travel agents and IATA airlines. So that forms part of the agency agreement. It binds both travel agents and airlines. We then have some resolutions that just bind airlines and just impact airline processes. So resolution 735D is the main resolution that outlines what irregular operations are, what the obligations of each airline is, and also outlining some of the procedures around how airlines process irregular operations, obtain inventory from other airlines, and reissue documents, tickets, and EMDs. We have Resolution 766, which outlines the process for obtaining reservations, which could include these irregular operations. And we have Resolution 722F, which outlines procedures around issuing, accepting, and changing tickets. Finally, we have the Revenue Accounting Manual, and that exists through a resolution, so it's also binding on members. And that is a separate standard which outlines procedures for interline billing. So those are the binding standards, and then we also have a number of standards that provide best practice or guidance on different areas. So we have things like Recommended Practice 1735, which outlines recommendations on dealing with planned schedule changes, and we have things like Recommended Practice 1701J, which looks at sort of best practices around automated self-service rebooking. So it's very, very important that you have access to all of these standards and that you have access to the very latest version of all of these standards. So these standards are produced in a number of publications. Three main ones that we're looking at here. So the Passenger Agency Conference Resolution Manual contains the agency resolutions, and that includes 830D. And that one is freely available, so it's free of charge. It binds travel agents and airlines, so we make it very broadly available. And the link to that manual is in the presentation. We then have the Revenue Accounting Manual, which is a standalone publication, and we have the Passenger Services Conference Resolution Manual, which is also a standalone publication. The Passenger Services Conference Resolution Manual contains all of the other resolutions and recommended practices that we're discussing here today beyond Resolution 830D. So both the Revenue Accounting Manual and the Passenger Services Conference Resolution Manual are actually available for purchase, and there is a link in the presentation as to where those publications can be obtained. Most of your airlines, the people that are on the call today, you're already purchasing these manuals. So if you haven't seen these within your airline, you just need to find out the person that has access to that, and you should have access to all these standards. Just the final point to note is that the standards we are looking at today with the changes that become effective on the 1st of June, they have not quite made it into the very latest version of these publications. So the latest version of these publications will be produced and available to the industry over the next couple of weeks. And so the changes we're talking about today are fully described in this presentation and these materials. And then you will have access to the very complete sort of final version of these through those standard publications over the next couple of weeks. The other point to be made is around the development of standards generally. So for those of you who are on the webinar today who have not been involved in IATA standard setting activities, now is a great time to have a look at how this works and understand how your airline might want to be involved in the future. So standards are not set in stone. We change standards all the time as requirements change or as airlines need things clarified or explained. And we're also constantly looking at new areas for standards. So any activity where it makes sense for us all to come together, we can have a standards discussion about that. And within the presentation, we have a link there to a site on our iata.org webpage that just kind of summarizes how we develop standards and how you can get involved. So I'd really encourage you to go along and have a quick look at that also. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just step through each of those main areas of things that are changing. And the first one we're going to talk about are the changes to Resolution 830D, and that becomes effective from the 1st of June this year. So Resolution 830D is an agency conference resolution. It binds travel agents and airlines, IATA travel agents and IATA airlines. And this resolution outlines the procedures that an accredited agent follows as they're making reservations and issuing tickets with airlines. So the problem we had with Resolution 830D related to the capturing of customer contact information. And so this is information like a passenger's telephone number or email address. And this has a direct impact on an airline's ability to process and handle an irregular operation. Because very, very often, for a booking that's come from a travel agent, the airline has no customer contact information within their reservation, within their PNR. And what this means is that in situations where it makes sense for an airline to contact a passenger, they're not able to do so. And this is an issue that consistently gets raised in passenger surveys as being one of the most important things to passengers, and that's being kept up to date with information when things go wrong. And so for the industry to kind of focus on this problem and resolve it, we really need to ensure that airlines have access to these pieces of contact information at the time the booking is made. So what happened is that the language in Resolution 830D was strengthened to ensure that this information is being captured by travel agents and then is being passed on to airlines. And IATA's had a number of activities in this space. So we had a sort of campaign around this. We had a number of changes to the technical reservation standards. So that was some new SSRs that got developed, allowing travel agents to pass this information directly to airlines. We still had a gap, however, because many travel agents were not entering this information within those standardized SSRs, or were capturing it and not entering it into the reservation record at all, or they weren't capturing it. So for a number of reasons, we had this situation where very, very many travel agent bookings today still do not contain this information. So the changes to Resolution 830D, there's three main new requirements for a travel agent. So first of all, they need to actively ask each passenger whether that passenger wants to have their contact details passed to each operating airline in the itinerary, each participating airline. And so that needs to be an active, direct conversation for a travel agent that's in front of a passenger, or it needs to be some sort of acknowledgement on an online booking tool or a booking path for an online agency. The second point is that where the passenger has said, yes, I would like my contact details passed on, the agent must enter these into the reservation record using the correct technical standards. And that's just the industry standard SSR around customer contact. And if you don't have access to that information, that's all published within the reservation standards, which is the AirImp publication. The third step that the travel agent must follow is that if the passenger indicates that they don't wish to have their information passed to the airline, the agent must advise the passenger that if they don't provide this information, they may not receive some information from an airline relating to flight cancellation or any changes to the flight prior to departure. So those are the three main steps. Now, these changes are going to require a little bit of development on the travel agency side, and they're certainly going to require some changes to travel agency process and policy and training of frontline travel agents. So this is a huge piece of work for travel agents, and we will be engaging directly with the travel agency associations and with travel agents through our normal communication channel. We're also, however, really reinforcing that this has to come from airlines as well. So airlines have relationships with travel agents in a lot of the markets they operate in. They have direct agreements and contracts with travel agents beyond the agency agreement, and they're also in day-to-day contact with a lot of travel agents. So we're asking all airlines to take this away and proactively put this into your bulletins, proactively put this into your ticketing policies, and engage directly with airlines on this point. And when you're having this engagement, the really, really important message is that this information is simply there to allow an airline to provide up-to-date and timely notifications to passengers, and only when something goes wrong. And so there's a lot of misinformation in the market, a lot of confusion between travel agents and airlines as to what this customer contact information relates to or is used for. And so there is some confusion that perhaps this is being obtained or passed on to an airline so that the airline can use this for commercial purposes. And this is not the case. And this is very, very specifically outlined in the resolution. The information is being obtained simply for the purpose of contact. And the important reason for this is that the airline might be dealing with that customer outside of hours. They might be dealing with the customer in the middle of the night in a funny location, on a holiday, on a weekend. And during these times, it's really not reasonable to expect that the contact to the passenger is being made through the travel agent. The contact that the airline may be making also relates to things that the airline has to resolve for the customer. So under Resolution 735D, if there's an irregular operation, it's happening very, very close to departure. It's happening within an airport environment. So it makes much more sense that the airline is letting the customer know what's happening in this specific circumstance rather than going back through the travel agent. And that might be something as simple as saying, your flight's delayed, please come to gate counter number 32 so that we can provide you with a refreshment voucher. That's information the airline has. It's not information the travel agent is going to have. It doesn't make sense for the travel agent to have that contact. The other really important pieces with this one is that the standard does not impact the agent's ownership of the booking, and it doesn't impact their relationship with the customer. So it's purely the passing of some contact information for the airline to use in these specific circumstances. It also in no way impacts the travel agent's ability to continue to service the customer through their journey, or to continue to service the customer at any point in the future. So again, most of the process change on this one is at the travel agent's end, but there are a few really important actions for airlines. We're asking that airlines please communicate this directly to travel agents. So if you're on this webinar today and you're not in the team that deals with travel agents, usually that's somewhere within a sales or a commercial function, please pass this information on to those teams. Ensure those teams are having a conversation about the background to this. It's about the mutual benefit to customers, and that they're considering referencing this language and this change within your ticketing policies, within your procedures for agents, and even within your agency agreements. So this compliance of this change, it really comes down to each and every airline, because you are the only person that sees your reservation data that's coming in from travel agents. So you are able to monitor compliance of this one by tracking your PNR data. You may also want to include compliance when you're negotiating a commercial agreement with an agent, but that's entirely up to you as an airline. The other really important point is that when you have this information, you may want to be configuring your internal systems to ensure that you can use it. So that's things like automation around sending text messages, internal procedures around text messages versus emails versus phone calls. If you have more access to this information, you can start using it more cohesively. Very last action on this one is that the GDSs play a really important role here. because they're the interface with travel agents usually. So the GDSs did a great job in implementing the technical SSR standard, and that's basically out there in every system. But they will play an important role in ensuring that agents are complying with this new procedural standard in 830D. So if you have teams dealing with GDS partners, really good idea just to flick this through to them as well and make sure that they're raising this with the GDS. What is the GDS doing to ensure that travel agents are able to comply with this and that they're spreading the word and raising awareness? So that's 830D. We're going to move now to the more kind of airline-centric standards, which is Resolution 735D and 766. Now, these changes are also effective from the 1st of June. So they're just around the corner, a few months away, and these resolutions are binding on every member airline. So you must follow the resolutions unless you have a bilateral agreement with any specific interline partner that you will not. So what is Resolution 735D? 735D is the resolution that focuses on irregular operations. It talks about airlines' obligations. It outlines procedures in these situations. And that's complemented by other technical standards. Resolution 766 is an important one of these technical standards. It talks about interline reservations procedures. So in this situation, it's talking about procedures around one airline asking another airline for seats following an irregular operation. So changes to 735D and 766 were made in parallel. They now work very, very well and very closely together, and we'll look at those resolutions together. So the problem we had with Resolution 735D and 766 was that there was a little bit of ambiguity on how to distinguish an irregular operation from a planned schedule change. So the language in the resolution was not always as clear as it could be, and that often led to confusion or disputes between airlines. There was also a lot of confusion about when prior approval was required when you were obtaining inventory from a different airline. So it was unclear whether a telephone call was expected or whether within a certain period of time you could simply book that carrier's inventory as available in the system. Again, led to a lot of disputes. There was also just a few other points that were not very clear. There was a complicated process around upgrading to a higher cabin class and a few other pieces that often cause confusion. So we had a number of changes that impact these resolutions that take effect from the 1st of June. And so once again, we're going to step through these today. Everything that is changing in the resolution that kind of changes a process, we're covering in this webinar, and we've covered in the FAQ document. And then the final version of these resolutions, which has gone through our legal review and our government filing and our publication process, will be made available to the industry in just a few weeks' time. So the first main change is that we now have a consistent definition across the two resolutions and a very clear definition. And this is a definition of when an irregular operation has occurred that allows airlines to separate the two different processes. So we have a schedule change process, or we have an irregular operation process. And those are very different pathways involving very different actions for the airlines involved. So we now have a definition that, provided that the circumstance has not occurred earlier than 1 day prior, an irregular operation has occurred and the provisions of the resolution apply. And this is really, really simple. It's just saying that if the first impacted flight was departing on a Tuesday and the event that occurred that caused the irregular operation to occur happened on the Tuesday, then it's fine. You're definitely talking about an irregular operation. If the event that caused the irregular operation occurred on the Monday, you're also fine. You're also talking about an irregular operation. But if the event occurred on the Sunday, the event has occurred earlier than 1 day prior to the scheduled departure time of the first impacted flight, and you cannot have an irregular operation. In this situation, regardless of what has happened, the industry standard now points you down the path of the schedule change. And that's really just so we have a completely black and white definition that people can automate around and people can design process around. So regardless of what has caused a flight disruption, if anything is within that window, we can consider it's an irregular operation. If it's outside that window, we now can no longer consider that as an irregular operation. We must consider that it's a planned schedule change, regardless of whether it was something that was planned ahead of time or not. We've also introduced some new language just to clarify that sometimes in these situations, a change of airline is not actually required. And this was something that always caused a little bit of confusion in Resolution 735D. So if I've had a disruption and I end up getting rerouted onto the same airline that I was flying, but just on a later flight or a different routing, Resolution 735D may still apply. There doesn't need to be a change of airline. We also had an important change to the piece on upgrades, a huge simplification of the language in the resolution. As the industry standard will take effect from the 1st of June, we now have a situation that simply says that upgrading in these situations to a higher cabin class shall not occur unless there's a bilateral agreement. So unless you have a direct authorization from that airline or a standing agreement that you're able to upgrade, the assumption is you're only ever reaccommodating in the same cabin class. The last really important piece with 735D is we strengthened the language about endorsements. And so we always had this endorsement INVOL as the first 5 characters in the endorsement field. But the resolution was actually a little bit unclear on when you could use it and when you couldn't use it and when you had to use it. And so we've tidied that up and we've really strengthened this. So the language in the resolution now, if you are within Resolution 735D, you're in an irregular operation situation and you reissue a ticket, you must use those characters as the first 5 characters in your endorsement restriction field. There is no alternative that you're able to use. That must be used in the first 5. And similarly, if you are not in a situation described by Resolution 735D, you must not use these characters. And so that gives us a whole lot more clarity at industry level when we see a reissue. If we see the characters INVOL in the first 5 characters of that field, we know immediately that a genuine irregular operation has occurred and that the circumstances described in Resolution 735D have taken place. And so again, this comes down to training and process. There were a number of situations, or there are a number of situations today where this endorsement gets used incorrectly. It gets used months before a flight departs. It gets used in a schedule change. It gets used by a travel agent. And the resolution is now very clear that all of these uses are incorrect and are not permitted. So this is something that's very important. So then we move to the Resolution 766 changes, and this is all around how one airline asks another airline for a seat, so how they obtain inventory from another carrier. And we had this this kind of standing confusion on this issue in the industry about when prior approval was required and what booking method should be used. And so previously Resolution 766 had referred to a telephone call, and there was some confusing language with 735D around prior approval not being required. We also know that realistically many carriers are using system availability in these situations. They're certainly not making a telephone call. So this topic was discussed at length within the reservations committee, the ticketing committee, different groups looking at this topic. And basically the consensus of these airlines was that every airline and every relationship between airlines is actually going to have quite a different approach to this. And many airline partners are very happy for each partner within the relationship to simply use system availability because it's there, it's an existing process, it's nice and easy, and it allows automation and all the rest of it. There are many other partnerships, perhaps with interline partners that are not used as intensively, where the carrier would always expect a telephone call or always expect a conversation to occur between staff members in an airport environment. And so finding an industry standard that somehow accommodates those very different scenarios is really not adding value. And so 766 has now been reframed so that with every interaction, you must have a bilateral agreement with every interline partner that simply outlines the method for obtaining inventory that you as partners wish to use. And so as long as you're within that agreed booking method, you're within the agreed number of seats if there is some limitation, and as long as you're otherwise following Resolution 766, the carrier that you're obtaining inventory from should never turn your passenger away. And that was the change to 766. So that involves quite a bit of action on the airline side just to ensure that these agreements are in place with any partner that you typically use in an irregular operation. So many airlines already have these agreements with many partners. Some of these agreements form part of what's happening in an alliance. Some of these agreements form part of what's happening in a joint venture or a code share relationship. Some of these agreements might already be covered in a reprotection agreement or a special pro-rate agreement for reprotection or something like that. So many of these exist. Much of this work might have already been done. If you have partners that you don't have this agreement with, we've developed a really simple 2-page template agreement that you're most welcome to use between partners. You don't have to use it, and if you do use it, you might not wish to use all of it. You might want to change it around or enhance it, but it's just something so you've got a starting point to demonstrate how simple this agreement might be. And that template agreement has been shared out to your accredited representatives, but we'll also flick it out to everyone that was on the webinar today. So again, if you're not the person in your airline that deals with interline agreements and relationships with other partners, please ensure that you're flicking all these materials through to that team or that person just so they're aware of these changes. If you have a number of interline partners with whom you don't have this type of agreement, this is the piece that might take you a little bit of time between now and the 1st of June. So really the template we've drafted, it's just a simple checkpoint to say Airline 1 and Airline 2, we will either use our existing inventory methods, so that might be free sale, direct access, seamless availability, or we will define what the method is: telephone, email. You might have your own bilateral messaging protocol. Whatever that looks like, there just needs to be a really simple understanding between the partners as to what that is. You might also wish to include some details about number of seats. So if you're booking up to 9 seats on a flight, use my availability, otherwise give me a phone call or something. You might want to put something about the expectations about which booking class to use, which RBD to use. There might be other limitations or procedures that you want to outline in this agreement, but that's really up to you to negotiate. If you do not form this bilateral agreement before the 1st of June, the language in the resolution would now require that you directly contact that airline in every situation, because you're then kind of requiring a bilateral agreement at every time of reaccommodation. So really important that you're setting up these standing agreements, and then that you're training your teams and you're adjusting your processes for these. So there's some really important actions there. Again, templates there, and that will be shared. And then whatever you do just you need to ensure this is updated in your procedures, that all your teams are aware of what's going on. So the very final piece of these changes is the change to interline billing standards. And those are contained within the Revenue Accounting Manual. The Revenue Accounting Manual is binding on all airlines. It is described in Resolution 663, but it is published separately as a standalone industry standard. And the important thing here is that these changes to the Revenue Accounting Manual have already taken effect. So the Revenue Accounting Manual works on a slightly different cycle to most of the resolutions. It works around billing period cycles that roughly align with a calendar year. So the first billing period from January this year, these new standards have taken effect for tickets issued after that time. So again, we had a little bit of a problem with the Revenue Accounting Manual in that it didn't always directly work with the resolutions, and it wasn't always clear about the distinction between irregular operations and schedule changes, or how the endorsements on the tickets should be used. So the changes that have been made to the Revenue Accounting Manual, they really now just enforce 2 checkpoints that must be made every time a billing is occurring on a coupon following an irregular operation. So our industry standard process now, we moved away from flight interruption manifests, away from FIMS, and the industry standard process now is the reissue of electronic tickets. And what that means is that the new operator who's carrying the passenger will always have a reissued ticket coupon that they are lifting, and that is the coupon they're using to process their billing and to get money from the carrier that's holding the funds. And so at the time that billing occurs on that coupon, there are now these 2 really important processes that need to be followed. And these have been outlined in paragraph A2.5 of the Revenue Accounting Manual. And so we've kind of called these the 2-day rule and the 5-day rule. And they're each a little bit different, and they're there to provide different protections to the airlines. So the first of these is the 2-day rule, and that simply says that sectors on the reissued ticket may only be recognized as an involuntary rerouting when the reissued ticket has an issue date 2 days or less from the first scheduled departure date. So that sounds a little bit wordy and a little bit complicated. We're going to look at a example to make this super simple. But all this is saying is that at a document level, you check the date that the document was reissued, you check the first scheduled departure date, and you just make sure that the reissue happened 2 days or less from the first scheduled departure date. And that's really just a checkpoint to ensure that as closely as possible, the resolution has been followed to protect that kind of window and the definition of a regular operation. So that's the 2-day rule. The second process that needs to be followed relates to the coupon that's being billed. And that says an involuntary designation shall be considered invalid for any coupon on the reissued ticket with a departure date 5 days or more from the issue date of the reissued ticket. And so that is at a coupon level, and it's a simple check. The coupon you're billing, does that flight occur within those 5 days from the time of the reissue? And all that's doing is it's protecting the airline to ensure that coupons that shouldn't have been reissued have not been touched. So in an irregular operation, the carrier that is reissuing the ticket should only ever be touching the impacted coupons, only the flights that need to be changed. And that's just to get the passenger on their way, get them through to their next point of stopover. So if something has been reissued where the flight is outside of 5 days of that reissue date, clearly that's not going to be an impacted coupon. It's probably a return flight that's happening down the track, or it's a flight from a point of stopover that was not impacted by a disruption. So that's just a little checkpoint that's been injected into the revenue accounting process just to pick up those coupons that have been issued in error. And then when counting the number of days, the calendar day following the date of the reissued ticket shall be day 1. So this is providing some clarity. So the action for airlines on the revenue accounting changes, you need to make sure that your internal procedures are updated. If you're on the webinar today and you are not representing your revenue accounting team, please make sure this gets sent through to your revenue accounting team. There may be some system configuration changes that are required, particularly where you're using automation, either in your own system or in a system provider. So it's super important that they have made those changes and they're ready to go. And typically the revenue accounting systems are fairly good at this because we engage directly with them through the standards development and adoption cycle. This one took effect from the 1st of June, so 1st of January, so most of these systems are ready to go. The other point here is that very, very often within airlines, there is a bit of a disconnect between the revenue accounting teams that have to clean up the mess and the teams that are responsible for airport services or ticketing or re-accommodation. So this is just a really good opportunity, because things are changing, to bring those teams together and to talk about what your end-to-end processes are. So if you haven't done that for a while, now's a really good time. So just to bring this all together, we've got sort of 15 minutes to run. We'll step through this flowchart, and if we can, we'll answer a few questions. We'll look at what the end-to-end process looks like from the 1st of June. So the very first step occurs at the time something goes wrong. So this is at the time a flight is cancelled, at the time it becomes aware a passenger has missed a connection, an event has occurred. The very first checkpoint is just to establish, has that interruption, that event, has that occurred on the same day of the first impacted flight or on the day before? So the impacted flight is on the Tuesday. Has that event occurred on the Tuesday, or has it occurred on Monday, or has it occurred earlier? So if it has occurred on the same day, or if it's occurred on the day before, then provided everything else that's described in Resolution 735D is followed, and a regular operation has certainly occurred, and the processes within Resolution 735D will occur. And that immediately puts you down that path of what your airport teams need to do, how the ticket is reissued, how inventory is obtained, and what your obligations to the passenger and to other airlines are. If that interruption has occurred earlier, you're going down the no path, and you're on the left-hand side of this diagram. So an involuntary reroute, as defined in Resolution 735D, has not occurred, and the resolution does not apply. And what that means is that you're following a schedule change process, regardless of what has actually created that event. Because it's occurred outside the window, you're following that process. So it's not the operating carrier that's caused the disruption that takes action. It's actually the validating carrier of the ticket that takes action, and they do that using the existing reservation procedures for schedule change, and then that carrier's existing processes for schedule change ticketing actions. And every carrier is going to do that slightly differently. There's not a resolution around schedule changes. There's a recommended practice that gives some guidance, but you will need to determine what your procedures are in that circumstance. But most importantly, if you're on that left-hand side of the page, the characters INVOL should never be being used in the first 5 character spaces of the endorsement field on any reissued ticket. So that's the first step. You're either going down a regular operation path or a schedule change path. So again, just to make this super simple, a flight is cancelled on, a flight that was departing on Wednesday is cancelled on Monday. The cancellation on Monday does not occur on the day the flight departs, and it doesn't occur the day prior, so Resolution 735D in this example has not applied. Second step, you have a number of options in 735D on what you do for the passenger in these situations. And most importantly, under Resolution 735D, it's the carrier that's caused the disruption that is providing the solution for the passenger and getting them on their way. The passenger may require a refund, or they may require reaccommodation onto a different flight of the airline they were already going to fly on, or even a flight of a new operating carrier. So if you're going down the path of obtaining inventory on a new operating carrier, you need to check if there is a bilateral agreement in place that outlines the booking method. If there is an agreement in place, obviously you use this method. If there is not, you must directly contact the airline. You must not use system availability because you do not have a bilateral agreement that allows you to do this. And this is why it's super important that these bilateral agreements are in place by the 1st of June, if they're not already, but also that you're training your teams and you're building these into your internal process. So that internal process might be, for this interline partner, you're most welcome to use system availability up to 5 seats. For that interline partner, you're able to use system availability for any request. And for this other interline partner, you must speak to them directly within the airport. This is going to vary partner by partner, just as it does today, to a different degree. And so you must ensure that's included in your internal procedures and that your teams are trained. So the third step really doesn't change. This is an existing industry standard that's outlined in Resolution 722F and 735D. Really, the only change here is that strengthening of the use of the Invol endorsement. So once the passenger has accepted their new routing, it's the carrier that's caused the disruption who needs to obtain control of the impacted coupons and reissue them onto a brand new document. So it's a super simple process. It works exactly the same way today. Do you have control of the coupons? If you don't, you'll need to request them from the validating carrier. You can use the involuntary indicator to make that request so that the validating carrier knows that something's gone wrong and that's why they're releasing control of the coupon. If you already have control of the coupons, then you simply need to grab them and process the reissue. And again, the key change is that the reissue in this situation must occur with those characters INVOL in the first 5 characters of the endorsement area. And then the very last step in this process is the interline billing. And this standard really only touches the interline billing process, and that process only happens after a carrier has flown a passenger and lifted a coupon. So Resolution 735D and 766 are applying at the time something goes wrong. And then the revenue accounting manual is only applying in the back end when revenue accounting processes start. And so the start of this process is that you are billing on a coupon where the ticket has that INVOL endorsement. So you've already flagged, or your system has flagged, that this ticket has been identified as an irregular operation ticket. So all that you need to do is you need to run that 2-day check and then that 5-day check. So the 2-day check, did the reissue occur 2 days or less from the departure date on the reissued ticket? If it did not, then you're ignoring that designation and you're billing it as a schedule change, because it's very obvious that the endorsement has been applied incorrectly, and so for the purpose of billing, you will ignore this. If, however, you're answering yes to that 2-day rule, you're then going to go ahead and you're going to process the 5-day rule. And so that's at the coupon level, and it's saying, does the coupon to be billed have a departure date 5 days or more from the date of reissue? If yes, then again, you're going to ignore that involuntary reroute designation, and this time you're going to bill that as a voluntary reissue. If you're saying no to this question, then the process has been followed correctly, and you're going to bill that correctly as an involuntary reroute under RAM section A2 paragraph 2.5. So again, if you're not on the webinar representing your revenue accounting team, ensure this is shared with them. A lot of this language is going to be quite clear to revenue accounting teams, but we will just step through an example. So once again, we've got 3 coupons on a ticket. We've got the first flight departing on Tuesday, connecting to a flight that departs on Wednesday. So in this situation, the first flight has arrived late, and this has led to the passenger missing their connection. So the irregular operation event is the misconnection. As soon as we know the passenger is not going to make their connection, that is the event. So within 735D, we check if that event happened on the day of the impacted flight or the day before. It certainly did, because the flight that has been impacted departed on Wednesday. The passenger has misconnected on Wednesday. Resolution 735D applies, the passenger is going to be rerouted, the ticket is going to be reissued, and the ticket must contain the endorsement INVOL. So following this example through, we've now got a reissued ticket. The reissued ticket has taken only the 2 impacted coupons, Paris, Frankfurt, Frankfurt, Berlin, and we've reissued that onto Paris, Munich, Munich, Berlin. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get flights on the same day. We've provided flights on the following day, on the Thursday. We've reissued the ticket with the correct INVOL endorsement. So what we're now going to imagine is that we are the carrier that has operated the second coupon on the reissued ticket. So that's the Munich to Berlin ticket. And so we're looking at processing the outward billing on that coupon. So we're going to do 2 things. We're going to check the 2-day rule, and we're going to check the 5-day rule. So the 2-day rule is super simple. We're just checking the first impacted flight on the reissued ticket. We're checking that against the document level reissue date. And we're checking that that has occurred within 2 days. It has, so the 2-day rule passes. So we then move to the next section on our flowchart, and we say, okay, now we will check the 5-day rule. And the 5-day rule, instead of being checked on the first impacted flight, it is being checked on the coupon that is being billed. And so there might be a number of coupons on this reissued ticket, depending how complicated the itinerary was and how difficult it was to reroute the customer. We're just looking at the coupon that needs to be billed, and we're comparing that day, back to the reissue day. And again, this is just a checkpoint to ensure that kind of downline coupons that shouldn't have been touched, to ensure that those haven't been reissued by mistake. And in this example, the 5-day rule check passes also, and so we simply proceed to bill this as an involuntary reroute following an irregular operation. So that is the new process from the 1st of June. And complementing the process in the revenue accounting manual that has already taken effect. So once again, we have these materials that have been sent out. We will be sending all of these materials out to the attendees on today's webinar just over the next couple of days. And really the most important thing with this is that you're sharing this with all your impacted teams. So interline teams, reservations and ticketing, airports, reaccommodation teams, revenue accounting, interline and alliances, the more the merrier. Please just make sure this gets out to anyone it needs to. There's a couple of questions in the question box, so I'm just going to do my best to bring those up and to answer those, so please just give me 1 minute. So the question I've got in the question box is, do the operating teams need to know these resolutions to define an itinerary or a change as a schedule change or an irregular operation? And the answer to that is it's really up to you. So a lot of airlines will automate these processes so that the frontline teams don't need to know the exact details. They're just following an automated process. A lot of other airlines will take these resolutions and they will kind of build these into internal flowcharts, internal processes and procedures, and that's really up to you. So whether or not you share these resolutions with your frontline staff, the most important thing is that your airline is following them. So that's up to you as to how you manage that. I'm just trying to bring up the other questions here. Give me 2 ticks. Sorry, Jojo, I'm just having a few issues with this, the
Do you want me
question box. Yeah,
do you want me to
if you can
read it?
access it, you're outside. Yeah, if you could read them, that'd be awesome.
Okay, perfect. Um, Definition of IRREG is set at 1 day. Would there be a definition of what 1 day would mean? For example, a flight due to depart on day 2, Tuesday, at 23 hours 50 is cancelled and passengers are rerouted on day 1, Monday, at 1 a.m. in the morning. Actually, there's nearly 2 days at the end. Will this be covered and clarified?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the way the resolution is written, it's purely calendar days. So in your example, even though there's a long period of time because it's 1 in the morning on day 1, all the way through to 11 o'clock at night on day 2, that would still be covered. And so if that's not clear enough in these materials, we can add that into the FAQ. And that received a lot of discussion across the airlines. There was a lot of debate about whether this should be a number of hours or a number of days, and really where that landed was just that the simplest way of doing this is days, because people can very easily kind of deal with days of the week. It's something that you don't need to sit there calculating. A person can do it as well as the system. But absolutely, it's just an entire calendar day, regardless of the exact time that anything happens on those calendar days.
Next question. How can number of seats be limited? Is there a system capability for that to restrict in case of invol?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and that's completely up to your system provider. So every system is going to have different ways of doing this. Some systems have specific modules for regular operations. Others have more kind of general processes or general controls. But I would really encourage you to talk to your system providers about that. And when they don't have a solution, it's also something you can agree between interline partners as a procedure.
Next question. What's the impact of this change in NDC side?
It's a good question. So fundamentally, there's no difference whether you're using NDC or whether you're using traditional distribution. The obligations that we've outlined in this resolution still absolutely apply. The only thing I'd say is that NDC kind of gives us some new capability to obtain inventory and that type of thing. And so as part of those NDC conversations, some of those airlines are looking at what the processes for regular operations or for schedule changes look like. And if you're interested in being part of those conversations, please come along to those groups that are looking at the NDC standard, and we can certainly put you in touch with the people managing those standards.
How it was decided to be 2 day and 5 days, and let's say, for example, not 3 days and 6 days.
Oh, how do I answer that question? So all of these industry standards get developed following conversations with airlines and with impacted system providers. That's how standards work. So these conversations kind of occur. These ones kind of have occurred over a 12 or 18-month period. A number of meetings, a number of conference calls where these different options get discussed and debated. And so where that has landed, that is kind of the consensus that we achieved in taking all airlines requirements and working out where people were happy to land.
Okay, instead, in terms of time, we'll take two more questions, and then all the other questions will be included on the FAQ that will be circulated to all the airlines.
Great.
1 second. If there's no bilateral agreement and somehow the passenger was admitted on OA flight, how will the settlement be done?
So that's a really good question. The settlement is obviously a different process from the process around obtaining inventory, and so there's no impact on that process, and you need to be separately managing these two issues. So if you have a passenger that's presenting for a flight, and they are on an Invol reissued ticket, but you don't have a bilateral agreement in place, that's an indication to you that your interline partner has broken the compliance with the resolution. And so you can manage that just as you would with any interline partner. If they do something that doesn't follow a standard or doesn't follow the agreement, you can bring that up with them, and you may have provisions within your interline agreements or your contracts to raise a dispute. But in terms of the kind of base level standards, there's no impact on the interline billing standard based on the bilateral agreement to obtain inventory. It's something that you would need to manage as an airline.
Okay, somebody would just like to reconfirm the days count again for the 735D change to be involved. In one of your examples, you said impact Monday, but exchange Wednesday. Would not be INVOL, but under RAM change. So maybe we can
So
just go back to the example.
yeah, this is where we have to be really, really clear that we're talking about two different standards. So the Resolution 735D does not impact RAM. Resolution 735D impacts what you do when something goes wrong, how you process the passenger, and how you reissue the ticket. The RAM standard is completely separate. So this is something that people get very, very confused about, and it's really important you look at these separately. So the Resolution 735D, the 2-day rule within the resolution, is around when something went wrong. So something goes wrong, a flight is cancelled, a passenger misconnects, a flight has a mechanical issue and is going to depart late. That is an event, and it's not going to appear anywhere on the ticket. It's only the people in the airport that know when that event has occurred. And Resolution 735D just says that if that event is on the day of the impacted flight, or if that event is on the day before that flight, that you're within the resolution, and that applies. The revenue accounting standard is then very different. It's aligned, but it's a different standard, and that's a 2-day rule checking the date of the reissue to the date of the impacted flight. And so that doesn't look at when an event occurred, it looks at when a reissue has occurred. So I just really encourage you to take this away, step through those flow charts, but in your mind have a very clear distinction between Resolution 735D that talks about when an event occurred and what is happening to the passenger, and then the Revenue Accounting Manual, which talks about when a reissue has occurred and when a flight departs.
Good. Thank you so much for all your questions. And as I've mentioned, we have received a lot of questions, and due to the time, we have to stop the webcast, and we will answer all your questions through the FAQ document that we will be circulating. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good day to everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and good luck with your implementation of the changes. We're here at your disposal if you need anything, and within that FAQ document, you will see some contact information if you need to get in touch with IATA.
Thank you, and have a good day to everybody.